Well, thank you all for coming in this rainy, windy day. For you to make it, you see about 100 or so, this is pretty amazing. You guys are in hardcore. I just want to welcome you to the Dean's Lecture Series in the Doerr School. We started this lecture series right when we launched the school. If you look at sustainability and you ask the question, where does it fit in a campus? This is not just a business issue or a law or engineering or humanities or science. It's all of the above. It's a complex issue where topics kind of transcend so many disciplines and touches upon and integrates. You need the integration of knowledge. And so we felt that it's important to start a lecture series to be educated and informed about issues that don't neatly fit into a departmental seminar. And in fact, the first series of lectures that we had right in the autumn quarter of 22 was on environmental justice, because it transcended so many departments and so many disciplines. And we learned. Then we launched a search, and we're hoping to land a faculty in that area. And this is part of the learning that we are doing as an educational institution. So that's part of the reason we launched this. And today we have another one such topic which touches upon so many disciplines, and that is restoring the atmosphere, hope and action for the planet. And we are delighted to have two speakers and a student, which is terrific. One is, the second speaker is going to be Leif Wenar. Thank you for joining. And Leif, and I'm going to read out, just bear with me, the Olive H. Palmer Professor in Humanities, and by courtesy, Professor of Political Science and Professor of Law, Senior Fellow at the Woods Institute for the Environment, and the Faculty Director, and this is very important, and we are building relations and interactions between the McCoy Family Center for Ethics in Society. And he will be introduced by our first speaker, and that is Rob Jackson. And Rob is the Michelle and Kevin Douglas Provostial Professor in Earth System Science and a Senior Fellow at the Woods Institute for the Environment and the Precourt Institute for Energy. He is internationally acclaimed. Research focuses on how humans affect the Earth, producing critical scientific knowledge to shape policy and reduce the impact of global warming. He serves as the chair of the Global Carbon Project, the premier academic organization quantifying global greenhouse gas sources, and his latest book, and I'm hoping he will talk about it, Into the Clear Blue Sky, was recently named one of the 8 best science books of 2024 by the Times of London. And Rob is going to then introduce Leif, and who will then introduce the student, Vivian Shay. So without any further delay, let me welcome Rob, and then Leif, and then Vivian. Thank you.
Vetanuota sadankala, Vetanuota sadankala. I'm barefoot in the twilight waters of Lake Ulinden, singing a Finnish fishing song. Let's pull the seine, many fish to gain. Rope puddles around me as I line in hundreds of feet, hand by hand. Slow down, my host and singing songmaster, Teru Mustonen, tells me. No more than 4 meters per minute. Okay, until I pause unconsciously to watch an Arctic tern fishing. Keep the net moving, he tells me. I wish drawing in greenhouse gases from the air were as simple as drawing in fish from a net. It isn't, but nature provides some of the best and cheapest ways to mend the atmosphere. As co-founder and president of the Snow Change Cooperative, Tero and his partners are stitching damaged ecosystems back together across the Arctic to fight climate change. As Mustonen says, for indigenous peoples and local communities, the flow of information isn't just on one side of the brain. It's your hands, your feelings, your emotional attachment to land and change. The emphasis is on holistic engagement. Holistic engagement and feelings contribute to a new form of restoration called rewilding, practiced most commonly in Europe. Rewilding differs from traditional restoration in placing less emphasis on recreating what used to be and more effort on creating habitats that will survive in a changing world. The North needs snow and ice for life, Tero tells me. Climate change is hitting us harder here than anywhere else, except perhaps in the Pacific. What I and others have most observed in the high Arctic tundra, he adds, is the massive permafrost melt. I traveled, for example, 1,000 kilometers in a small open boat on the Siberian seacoast. Kilometer after kilometer, I saw collapsing permafrost walls. I heard the sloosh of the coast slumping into the sea. There was a weird smell, too, as if you had a gas lamp running without a spark. This was my first long trip with the Chukchi reindeer herders. I had no words, he says, about seeing ecosystems collapse before him for hundreds of miles. I decided I must press every button in my power to convey how bad this is. I'm here with Mustonen to visit the rewilded Linnunsuo wetland. A decade ago, this site was a Mordor-like slag heap. This is the first rewilding site in Finland, he tells me, as we crunch a gravel path around the wetland. We skirt dark, rectangular scars where industrial diggers ripped peat from the ground like thick sod to be sold for energy. 2 decades of peat mining had left the organic soils bare, which released toxic iron sulfate during storms. Mustonen points to a channel leaving the site. We had 2.7 pH acidic waters leaving here that killed all life in the river. The event was detected not by the company, but by our fishermen. The whole river was dead. Then 1 year later, another warm spell and thunderstorm killed all the fish again. The river had just begun healing from the first death event. As the mayor of nearby Selkii village, Mustonen and other city leaders said, "Enough." We took them to court, and for the first time in Finnish history, the company pulled out of a village. We won a big victory. As a result, Tero adds, the company made the first 3 wetland pools to control the acidic waters. They needed to drown the exposed soil in a low-oxygen environment. Linnunsuo became one of the largest wetlands in Finland. In 2017, the mining company asked Snow Change if it wanted to own the site. We decided to adopt the wetland and try to fix the whole system, Mustonen says. Snow Change added more pools to control the acidity. They increased the wetland's size and are measuring its progress in the fight against climate change. Tero and I stopped to see his students, Antoine and Alicia, place a clear plastic chamber the width of a dinner plate on the ground. They measure a recovering grassy area first, and then an area of black degraded peat soil. The analyzer whirs. The grassy area is taking up CO2 by the plants, as expected, but the degraded peat scar is hemorrhaging carbon to the atmosphere as microbes break down the exposed peatland soil. The most important action to take in a degraded peatland is to stop soil-based emissions, Mustonen says. It's 400 to 600,000 kilos of carbon dioxide emissions per year we're stopping through our rewilding. That's like taking 100,000 US cars off the road. But when the students pick up their chamber from the black peat scar and they move it to a wet, mucky area near the flooded wetland, the methane analyzer buzzes. "Oh my God," Antoine says, "it's nasty," pointing to a large spike on the analyzer screen. The methane went really crazy. It can take decades for the carbon dioxide that wetland plants absorb to outweigh the climate harm from the methane the wetland microbes release. Tero is unflinching. We accept a temporary increase in methane emissions given the benefits for birds and biodiversity, the lower CO2 emissions, and protection from acid releases. He grabs a handful of exposed peat soil. This was a moonscape. There is no such thing as restoration here. These recovering ecosystems will be living in a warming planet no matter how successful we are. Perhaps landscapes have the right to decide on their own terms which species come back and what food chains form. That's the magic of rewilding compared to ecosystem restoration, he says. In conservation biology, every little weed is nipped away with every single species not wanted by humans. They want to create an artificial replica of something from the past. But climate change means we are never going back, in our lifetimes at least, to something from the 1950s or before. This wetland is now home to 200 bird species, he says. We are witnessing the emergence of novel landscapes. This peatland took 10,000 years to form and 25 years to destroy. And now, in an exciting and transformative way, these rewilded landscapes are reemerging as something new. They are fierce and stout and excited to be alive. And it's amazing to be standing in them and witness 100,000 geese landing in front of you in an autumn spiral. So grateful to be here today. Thank you all for coming, the rain notwithstanding. I'm Rob Jackson, author of the new book, as you heard, Into the Clear Blue Sky, The Path to Restoring Our Atmosphere. I think of my book as a repair manual for the planet, a how-to guide for restoring our air on a journey from climate despair to climate repair. I also chair the Global Carbon Project, an international group that tracks greenhouse gas emissions from the World Meteorological Organization to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. After watching years of climate inaction roll slowly by like floats in a parade, I went looking for hope as I researched and wrote this book. Today, I'll tell you a few things I learned and suggest a few new priorities for the Doerr School while we're at it. I'll begin by sharing my dream of restoring the atmosphere as a way to build a new narrative for climate action and to buy us some time to address more intractable emissions of carbon dioxide. My dream starts with methane because it's the only greenhouse gas that we could restore to pre-industrial levels in the lifetime of anyone in this room. Doing so will save us 0.5 degree C of warming. In that sense, methane is the climate dragon we should slay. Methane's deadly. Pound for pound, it warms 80 or 90 times more than carbon dioxide the first 2 decades after its release. Its concentration has also risen faster over the last few years than at any time since record-keeping began. Methane is mysterious. We're still trying to understand why methane concentrations are surging. It could be that more methane is belching from cows, oil and gas fields, coal mines, landfills, and thawing Arctic permafrost. It could be that warming temperatures are boosting emissions from tropical wetlands, the largest natural source. My group just published evidence for increased natural methane emissions in the tropics, and I end my book with a chapter on our work building a new methane monitoring network across the Amazon today. Methane is also neglected. The first ever major methane agreement, the Global Methane Pledge, was only signed a few years ago. More than 150 nations have committed to cut emissions 30% by 2030. Methane is also neglected because it only receives 2% of climate investments, despite contributing 2/3 as much warming as carbon dioxide in recent decades. And finally, methane's malleable, a plus for climate action. It's cleansed from the air naturally only a decade or so after its release. Because of this shorter lifetime, if we could eliminate all methane emissions from human activities, a big if, methane's concentration would return to pre-industrial levels in only a few decades. That's what I mean by restoring the atmosphere. To do that, we'll need to curb emissions from fossil fuel use, cows, landfills, and pipelines, as I'll describe in the next short excerpt from my book. I call this chapter Pipe Dreams, and it chronicles our work mapping methane leaks across city streets and working with policymakers to get them fixed. So pipe dreams. We're driving on East Street in Washington, D.C., a block or two from the White House. Nathan Phillips, a pioneer in detecting gas leaks under city streets, rides shotgun holding a folded paper map. He's marking it with a yellow highlighter block by block. We're covering all of Washington like a lawnmower, up and down, over and back, circling every cul-de-sac and backtracking for the diagonals. Mapping a city takes weeks. Phillips is a mop-top scientist with an infectious smile and at times a close-cropped beard and mustache. He cycles everywhere, faster than most people drive. Once, I visited his office, and I couldn't figure out why he was so fidgety, until I realized he was pedaling under his desk, pedal powering his laptop to avoid using grid electricity. You must love someone that committed. We're here measuring gas leaks under city streets and sidewalks to reduce climate-busting methane emissions and the risk of gas explosions. Hundreds of thousands of gas leaks pepper the pipelines of U.S. cities and suburbs. Our car sparks more plugs than a tattoo parlor. A PVC pipe juts up from the roof holding an anemometer that marks wind speed and direction. A GPS sensor pokes out like a neck bolt on Frankenstein's monster. Air intake tubes dangle tentacle-like from the front bumper and connect to the methane analyzer buzzing in back. Bingo, Phillips says as our analyzer pings on 15th Street inside of the White House lawn. A few streets to the north, our analyzer jackpots like a Vegas slot machine. We map half a dozen gas leaks on one block between I and K Streets at McPherson Square. How can this be in the richest nation on Earth? In truth, gas utilities would go bankrupt if they had to fix every leak, and we won't pay them to do it. Public Utility Commissions, or PUCs, cap how much companies can charge their consumers to repair and replace pipelines. Consumers, in turn, pressure PUCs to keep rates down. So leaks away from homes and buildings that aren't found to be hazardous can go unrepaired for years. The year before our work in DC, Phillips and I published the first public maps of natural gas leaks in any city. We mapped 3,000 gas leaks across Boston's serpentine streets, 4 leaks for every road mile. And people noticed. Within a day of publication, Boston Mayor Tom Menino wrote a strongly worded letter to the Public Utilities Department urging its chair to increase the scrutiny of pipeline leaks. Then Representative, now Senator Ed Markey, wrote a letter to the federal agency in charge of pipeline safety. This study shows that we need a plan to ensure leaks from aging gas pipelines are repaired, to conserve this natural resource, protect consumers from paying for gas they don't use, and prevent emissions of greenhouse gases. Sometimes a scientific study catalyzes the work that dozens, even hundreds of people have undertaken for years. Labor unions in Massachusetts had called for pipeline repairs for decades. Consumer safety advocates pushed for greater pipeline safety. Environmental groups promoted cleaner air with less greenhouse gas emissions and ozone. The year after our study, Massachusetts passed an accelerated pipeline repair and replacement bill. Local utilities were allowed to spend and recover more to fix their pipelines. Massachusetts created good-paying jobs. Households paid only $1 more per month, but also saved by not paying for gas that leaked out. The risk of explosions dropped too. And yes, the world's climate benefited, but climate wasn't the primary motivator, safety was, and that's okay. We reached a similar outcome a year later, mapping 6,000 gas leaks across DC. Washington Gas's Project Pipes program began soon after as a 40-year effort to upgrade DC's distribution system. The local Public Service Commission concluded it would enhance safety and reliability for 165,000 customers. A decade ago, I might have ended the story there. Scientific data can help us find and reduce emissions of methane and other greenhouse gases. But in the decades since we began to map pipeline leaks, the world drove another 500 billion tons of greenhouse gases into the air. We've already kissed the bumper of 1.5 C global temperature increases. 2 years ago, more than a decade after starting our work, I returned to Boston and met Phillips at the eastern edge of the Longfellow Bridge. He cycled up wearing a brown Climate Summer t-shirt with its spoked bicycle wheel logo. We hugged and quickly smelled gas on the street. Walking east on Cambridge Ave, we found some of the same leak clusters we'd mapped a decade before. Stopping at 100 Cambridge Ave, we marked a cluster in the manholes on the south side there. We were standing outside the Massachusetts Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. This office oversees the Department of Public Utilities, the agency responsible for regulating gas pipeline safety across Massachusetts. Progress has been marginal, At best, even here literally on the front doorstep of the agency responsible for state energy and public safety. Even our environmental wins are too slow. Washington Gas started its Project Pipes program in 2014, the year we published our map of 6,000 leaks there. The DC Public Service Commission approved Phase 1 of Project Pipes for $110 million. 7 years later, after Phases 1 and 2, the utility had replaced only 29 miles of century-old cast iron pipes across its 1,200-mile network. That's a cast iron replacement rate of only 4 miles per year. When the world's on fire, I can't celebrate laying 4 miles of new pipe a year. So what would real success look like? So today, I'm here to celebrate the army of people rising to solve the climate crisis and eventually to see the atmosphere restored, as Arun mentioned. All of you here, all of our amazing students and staff and faculty across campus and in the Doerr School, all the inspiring people I met while writing this book, people inventing better technologies and building social movements. I met CEOs using clean energy to make the world's first green steel. Medusa scientists, magicians storing carbon dioxide or turning it to stone. People restoring landscapes, Amazon to Arctic. Building coalitions to save forests, preserve biodiversity, and slow climate change. We need new technologies, and Stanford is the best place in the world at developing them. But we need new social movements and behavioral research as much as new technologies. And here at Stanford, we have work to do. We could learn from people I met, like Rev Yearwood, founder of the Hip Hop Caucus, who uses music to fight poverty and pollution. Or Mats Karstrom, who organizes hunters and high school students to save forests through his conservation group, One Step Ahead. We need social movements because we live in a time when the top 1% of the world's population contributes more fossil carbon emissions than half the people on Earth. Some might rightly call that inequity greed. And climate solutions require fairer energy use. So we need 3 kinds of climate solutions. We in wealthier nations will have to use less to reduce global demand for things that pollute. Research on behavior and individual choices can help drive this change. We also need to adopt zero-emitting technologies for transport and for powering our homes with clean electricity. We'll need governments and policymakers to act too, of course. Institutions will play the key role here to support new technologies, regulations, and policies, including carbon pricing. If greenhouse gas pollution remains free, we will never realize a stable climate or global sustainability. And finally, because we delayed action so long, we'll need to hack the atmosphere to remove or destroy greenhouse gases already in the air. I used to think such talk distracted us from the real job of cutting emissions, and it does. But the inaction of the 2010s convinced me that to maintain a safe and livable climate, we need to develop technologies to remove carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases directly from the air using microbes, trees, and factory arrays. We'll need to do it at industrial scales, running the coal industry in reverse. I wish that weren't the case. Hacking the atmosphere is risky and expensive. By doing all these things, reducing personal consumption and emissions, systematically cleaning up energy-intensive industries, and removing greenhouse gases from the air, we could restore the atmosphere. To accomplish that goal, though, I think we in the Doerr School need to lead in additional ways. Technology work on carbon removal through the Doerr School Accelerator is excellent. So is the amazing work on batteries and clean energy at Stanford. But I no longer believe we can build our way out of climate change. We need to make ethics and environmental justice core tenets of sustainability teaching and research, as important as our groundbreaking work on new technologies. We need as much scholarship on behavior, social movements, and greenwashing as we have on green technologies. When we speak with our affiliates about natural gas use or scaling carbon removal, we should ask hard questions about how, where, and when richer nations can reduce fossil fuel use to leave room for poorer nations to grow. We should not shore up companies that both promote carbon removal and prolong fossil fuel burning. We should also acknowledge that future generations may choose not to spend their money on carbon removal. What makes us so sure that our kids will pay $250 a ton to remove carbon from the air when we weren't willing to spend $25 a ton to keep it out of the air to start with? If we truly want to be the best sustainability program in the world, we need to speak about historical responsibilities and environmental justice as often as we speak about speed and scale. Not once in a while, siloed in one new center or one new department or institute, but centrally across the school. If we don't, we will fail. Cutting fossil fuel use and restoring the atmosphere will save lives. Particulate pollution from coal and cars still kills 100,000 Americans a year. 1 in 5 of all deaths globally is attributable to burning fossil fuels. 10 million senseless deaths a year when cleaner, safer fuels are already available. Just as the Endangered Species Act of 1973 mandated recovery of species like the peregrine falcon, our goal for the atmosphere should be the same, to restore it to health. And as described in my book, the place to start is with methane. Methane is the only greenhouse gas that could be restored in the lifetime of anyone in this room. I've dedicated the past decade of my career to this quixotic idea, and I share it with you in hope. Thank you. And now it's a pleasure to bring up Leif Wenar. And come on up, Leif. And Arun gave him a short introduction. I'll go over a bit again. He's the Olive Palmer Professor in Humanities in the Department of Philosophy. Among his many affiliations on campus, he's a senior fellow in the Woods Institute. And he also, most pertinently for today, directs the McCoy Family Center on Ethics and Society. I'll point you to Leif's book, which came out a few years ago, called Blood Oil: Tyrants, Violence, and the Rules That Run the World. So I'd recommend his book to everyone. And he is also an expert on giving. He has a book called Giving Well, it's your book, say it. What's the title?
The Ethics of Philanthropy.
Giving Well, The Ethics of Philanthropy. Yeah. So, Leif, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely my pleasure, Rob. And thank you for this beautifully written book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And thanks for all the information and the inspiration.
Thank you all.
It's a terrific book. So let me pick you up on that last thing. Does the idea of restoration really apply to the atmosphere? And why have you spent so much of your book and so much of your career on methane in particular?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I covered some of this in my short readings. I've come to spend so much time on methane in part because we have run out of time to do other things. If we had a magic wand and could end carbon dioxide emissions today, there would still be 1 trillion tons of pollution in our air for thousands of years. And that's not true for methane. If we had a magic wand to end methane emissions today, and 2/3 of all the methane emissions on the planet come from things that we do, if we could end those, the atmosphere would go back to where it was 200 or 300 years ago within a couple of decades. And if that were to happen, and dare I say when that happens, we'll save 0.5 degree C of warming. We'll cut air pollution because with those methane emissions often comes the release of other gases like benzene and toxins that we breathe. So when we clean up methane emissions and greenhouse gas pollution, we also make ourselves healthier. So there are climate reasons for doing that, and I think there are social reasons for doing that. I find climate change sort of impossibly large to try and fix, and I think it helps people if we can break it down into discrete pieces. And the notion that we could actually see a change in the atmosphere, I believe, could motivate people in a way that waiting for future centuries might not. So that's why it's my dream.
Terrific. In the book, there's so much emphasis on ethical considerations, both at the individual level and at levels beyond an individual. What elements of an ethical framework for addressing climate solutions would you particularly emphasize to us here?
I would emphasize both individual and collective ethics. I think I mentioned inequalities in resource use. I don't believe that we can see sustainable solutions to climate and have the inequity in resource use and consumption that we see across the world today. I don't think that's possible. And maybe put differently, climate solutions allow us an opportunity to correct those historical injustices and reduce pollution for people in poorer communities here in the US and in poorer countries across the world. So I think we have a responsibility to help people poorer people here and those countries that need help. And then when we look at countries, we have filled the atmosphere with pollution. Is it fair that India can't burn its coal because we burned our coal first? And I think the answer to that question, in my opinion, is no, it isn't fair. So what do we do about that? Either we need to reduce our emissions even more to make room for them to burn a little extra coal, or we need to pay them to leapfrog the dirtier fossil fuel stage and go right to cleaner renewables. And I would add that India is investing amazingly both in solar, and they still generate about 80% of their electricity with coal because that's all they have. And they have 100 million people without electricity yet. So they have lots of people who don't have energy, who need to use more energy, and somehow we're going to have to use less or make more of that available to people like those in India.
Thanks. And as long as we're talking about ethics, I'd like to acknowledge the two postdocs we have shared between the Doerr School and the Ethics Center, Ben Mylius and Shannon Abelson, who are the ethicists in residence at the Doerr School and would be delighted to work with anyone at Doerr about social impacts.
You should stand up and say hello.
There's Ben, yay! All right, turning to more practical issues. If we're going to live in a sustainable world, can global energy use continue to grow like it's growing now?
That may be the most important climate question that anyone asks, and I don't think so. And I think we sense this. I look to groups like the International Energy Association, and the IEA, when you look at their sort of standard reference scenarios, those scenarios have energy use rising another 50% between now and 2050 globally. When you look at their zero emission scenario, the energy use is flat starting in about 2020 and even declining a little bit. So when the IEA looks at energy futures and sees a zero emissions future, it's only in a world where energy use flattens or even declines a little bit. And I think we all sense this, right? We can't continue to build more and more energy infrastructure and higher demand. What we end up doing is taking our renewables, leaving our fossil infrastructure in place, and just using more and more energy. And my personal belief is that is simply not sustainable. And I don't know what the answer is. I would love to hear from you how you get a world to consume less energy. That's not something that I'm able to do, but that really is what we need to do. If we don't, we will just keep building stuff. Even if we had hydrogen and fission and modular nuclear, we'll just build more gadgets, more screens, more vehicles, whatever that may be, and we'll end up relying on something else that we need. So I think energy use somehow has to drop, or at least flatten, plateau.
Terrific. I'm going to go to two of the excellent pre-submitted questions that we got, both on intergenerational issues, one from Catherine Connors and one from Danica Sun. Here's the question. We older generations have put more emissions into the atmosphere, but the younger generations will bear the brunt of the consequences. What then should we tell our children when we talk to them about climate?
Yeah, there's an easy one. When I speak to youth groups, which I do fairly often, I often start just by saying I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the legacy that we've left you. We're trying, and we'll do the best that we can. But I don't blame a younger generation for being angry, for feeling uncertain, for climate grief, and we bear that responsibility. I also tell them that some things never change, and one of those things is no matter where we are, no matter when people will be alive, there will always be something that we can do to make things better. For climate change, there's always some tenth of a degree that we can shave off and save people and species and ice and everything else. So just this idea that no matter where we are, each of us, each of you can make a difference in the world. I tell them that as well. And then I also think about other feedback I've gotten. I interviewed a young person named Grace Gibson Snyder in my book. Grace is one of the plaintiffs in the Montana case where they sued Montana based on its constitution to require it to include climate in its planning. And they won. And Grace is an amazing person, but she was quite clear that she'd had enough of older generations telling younger people how excited they were that they were so excited. She said, you act like you've actually done something by saying we're grateful that you feel so passionate about climate and you're ready to act on it. And I'm totally sympathetic about that. She's right. We've just thrust that upon the next generations, and the word she used was less polite than I used. But that's a fair feeling. So I think we acknowledge the things we've done wrong and acknowledge that we still have power to make a difference.
Well, there's so many stories in the book of people making a difference, and so many inspiring figures who are really trying to do, as you described, as a teacher in Sweden who was working to save old-growth forests, a soil ecologist who's working to get scientists out of the labs and into the streets. So what gives you hope? What makes you optimistic that we can make progress on climate?
Yeah, thanks. I think people in community give me hope. Again, the people in this room, the people here working so hard, the leaders in our school doing everything that you do to make the world a better place. So that gives me hope. The people I met writing this book, I was serious, that short passage I read, I wrote this book to go looking for hope and inspiration. That's one of the reasons that I did this. And I found that in the amazing people I met all over the world, some people in industry, some in advocacy, some in government, and all of those people, to see what they're doing, to see how much they're accomplishing, that gives me hope. And then I think it's a difficult time for many of us who care about the environment. I think hope and optimism is something that we can practice, almost like working out at the gym. My first homework assignment in every class I teach is for students to go home that first day and find some things in the environment that are better today than they were 50 years ago. So that we learn to appreciate the progress that we've made and the things that are better today. And that list is quite long. It includes the phase out of leaded gasoline from 30 or 40 years ago, which saved us a couple $1 trillion a year and lowered lead in the blood levels of our kids by 96%. Right? Also literally made us smarter because lead reduces the IQ of people too. So that happened because people had the courage to say we can get rid of this additive, lead, and make a difference doing that. So there are lots of examples like that. The Montreal Protocol is the most amazing agreement ever signed. It saved billions and millions and whatever it is of cataracts, skin cancers, deaths. And I think underappreciated, it saved 2 degrees C of warming by 2050. If we had not phased out CFCs, the most potent greenhouse gas molecules perhaps that we've ever created. So I think the climate benefits for the Montreal Protocol are underappreciated. And then lastly, and I'll stop, my personal favorite is the Bipartisan Clean Air Act. Right? So, save hundreds of thousands of lives a year. Our workers are more productive, we're healthier, and we get this on a 30-fold return on investment. So sometimes judicious regulation works, it pays for itself, and it saves lives. So I look for success stories and I hope restoring the atmosphere will fit into that bucket someday, but I want more success stories and try and share those.
Terrific. And when was the Clean Air Act? Remind us. When did
it goes first the 70s, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even before my time. That's hard to be, but.
So hope is possible. We're now going to ask for questions to continue the discussion from you all. I think there are roving microphones going by. Since we don't have a tremendous amount of time, could we ask questions be brief and to the point? Please.
Hi, thank you so much again for taking the time to share about your work in your book. I would love to hear a bit how you think that interventions that we can do to help local communities influenced by these, by the effects of climate change, especially given your work in the Amazons. So I'd love to hear more about that and how you think our generation in undergrad and in postgrad programs can work with the local indigenous communities to help advance planetary health efforts. Especially in the Amazons. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll have to think about how to answer that question. So I'll give you an anecdote from my book. As I mentioned, I end the the book in the Amazon, and I have we have colleagues in Peru and French Guiana and Brazil that we work with, local experts in each place. And when I went to visit Ayun Santos Fleischmann, who I interview in the book, the first time I visited him a few years ago, I talked to him about climate change, and he said, yeah, climate change is important, but here in Brazil we have sanitation, and people don't have jobs, they can't get to work, and there are all these other priorities. So climate change really isn't a top priority for us. And then I went back last year in the middle of the drought, and he literally wept when we talked together because of how much damage there had been done, everything from the dead dolphins to people who couldn't get to hospitals, couldn't get to work, couldn't get drinking water in the Amazon. So his view had pivoted just 180 degrees over only the few years that we've been working together. And I'm not entirely sure whether I answered your question. So why don't you repeat your question in shorthand form, if you would? Sorry.
No, you're good. I think even I was not sure what my question was, if I'm going to be completely honest. I think I would just love to hear, because it is interesting to hear your perspective about how some indigenous populations might not, or representatives might not think that climate change is a priority until a devastating event has occurred. So how do you recommend that our generation at prestigious universities like Stanford could work with those populations to create effective interventions?
I'm not sure I know how to answer that question. I know one of Arun's priorities is global engagement, and we have a lot of environmental justice advocates and experts in the room. I tend to think sometimes that we at Stanford can look too far afield sometimes and could spend more time looking at our local community groups in the Central Valley or Oakland or East Bay, wherever that might be. But I'm not sure how to engage with all of those groups. I'm sorry. Yeah, let Leif answer that question.
Just as it happens, my NGO has been working with some of the communities in the Amazon, helping them to understand the legal system better in Brazil in particular. As you know, Linnunsuo is really helping indigenous communities get access more to legal mechanisms to stop the illegal logging and mining. And once the communities know better how to manipulate the legal system, they can start acting in their own interest to get some change and defend themselves. After all, they're on the ground. They know what's happening. They're the ones who really have to make these efforts with the government. Please.
Yeah, some time ago, it was observed that we're replacing coal with natural gas. Everyone was excited about that because it meant less carbon in the atmosphere. But then they discovered that a lot of the natural gas structures were leaking, like your comment was, and the Obama administration put regulations down to do away with that. And then a new guy came in and got rid of them all. And then Biden came in and put them back. And there's this new guy that's going to get rid of them all again. And I find it all kind of depressing. And the problem is that we in here can understand what the problem is, but Joe Sixpack, methane to him is a joke. And we're not going to get anywhere. I just find it depressing. I don't know if there's a question in there, but that's just my observation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, natural gas, I will use the past tense, there were good reasons to transition from coal to natural gas, right? And greenhouse gas emissions is one of them, but particulate pollution. I mean, coal is a 19th century fuel, right? Coal is the nastiest fuel that we have in terms of mercury in human health. I mean, it's a bad fuel. We should not be burning it anymore, and as long as people have access to energy. Not having energy is bad for health too. So gas has many benefits relative to coal, but I don't think we have the time now, particularly in wealthy countries like the US, to be building a lot of new gas infrastructure when we could be building renewables. That's a personal opinion. That's not a scientific statement. So I think the time for large new gas infrastructure should be over soon, I hope, as we transition to renewables. But
I'm talking about the regulations to prevent the leaks were put in place by Obama, and then they were taken out by Trump, put in place by Biden, and now they're going to be taken out again. And so we're actually worse off right now because that's where it's going right now with the present administration. It's very sad. That's it.
So
building new facilities, fixing those leaks.
It's true, but fixing the leaks for gas doesn't fix the CO2 emissions that come from burning that gas. And there are new technologies that will help us, independent of the government, satellites for the super emitters. There's some great things happening there. And it's not so black and white for me about, our politics is mystifying. I mean, yes, Biden did amazing things for climate through his bills, but oil production also increased to record levels in the Biden administration, far above where it was under the Trump administration. So it's not so black and white for me. I do agree that phasing out gas emission legislation and incentives really to reduce leaks, mandates to reduce leaks, is a bad idea, yes. But it's not sort of a black and white politics issue for me so much.
Is it on? It is on. So, Rob, thank you for the wonderful book. It really is just a great thing.
Thanks.
And I wonder if you could give us an update on the Global Methane Pledge. This was something that was signed by 159 countries in 2021 at the COP26. And I don't know if you're on top of where it stands, but what are its prospects for actually achieving the kind of goals you set out?
Well, this is supposed to be a discussion about optimism. In all seriousness, we just released our new global methane budget as part of the Global Carbon Project that I chair, and there is no evidence yet that there is any decline in global methane emissions at all. And I'm skeptical that we will reach the goal of a 30% cut by 2030, but I don't want to undercut efforts that people are trying to make as well. So all I would say briefly to answer your question is there's no evidence yet that it's happening, unfortunately. So we have work to do.
It would seem that you have a rather pessimistic attitude, accepting carbon as inevitable. What is the potential for discontinuous innovation to break through these seeming intractabilities? For example, Projeto Pareti in Brazil to develop green photovoltaics, a Manhattan-like project in the next 3 years. If we did that in other developing countries with technological potential, like South Africa, could we not overcome the intractability or going backwards where this country is going? Leaving, well, you know what I'm saying. I wouldn't say new guy. I would say President Trump. We know who he is. Let's name him.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I don't recall saying that I thought carbon use is intractable, or I don't know what the word you used was, but I don't remember saying that. I don't think carbon use is inevitable. Would we be better off with Manhattan-type projects on clean energy? Yes, we would. Are we willing to pay for that right now? No, we aren't. Are we doing exciting things in, fission and hydrogen and other things that may help? Yes, we are. So I'm not sure what to say. We could be doing more. What I think maybe what I meant is that there's 1 trillion tons in the atmosphere. That is there. No new energy technology is going to solve that problem unless we use that energy to pull the carbon dioxide out of the air. And then maybe we should have a discussion about what else we might do with that energy in place of just pulling the carbon dioxide out of the air. So that's the inevitable part about carbon dioxide. No one alive now or in any time in the next century will see the atmosphere restored for carbon dioxide. There's too much of it, and it's too costly to pull it out of the air at scale. I'll give you one example, and then I'll stop. I was just visiting Heirloom, which is a carbon removal company in San Francisco. And great company doing interesting things with limestone and carbon removal. Their process takes about, I'll get the numbers wrong, but about 1,500 kilowatt hours for 1 ton of carbon dioxide, right? So about 1.5 megawatt hours to pull 1 ton of carbon out of the atmosphere. So let's say we want to pull 1 billion tons of CO2 out of the air, and the IPCC suggests we should be pulling 5 or 10 billion a year. But to do 1 billion at today's efforts would require about, well, a billion and a half megawatt hours of electricity. And California's retail electricity per year in round numbers is about 250 million. So 5 times California's electricity levels to pull 1 ton of carbon dioxide out of the air. Is that impossible? No, that's not impossible. Is that likely? I don't think so. And so my reluctance, and I think I'm extremely happy about the carbon removal efforts here. I support research on carbon removal. I am skeptical that people will choose to pay at scale to do what is necessary, as I said before, when we weren't willing to keep it out of the atmosphere at far lower costs. So the energetics behind it are shockingly high and frighteningly high.
Just picking up on the tech side, I was going to ask you about a topic which is becoming more and more prevalent in Doerr School, which is geoengineering. In the book, you sound a bit discouraged about using pollution to fight pollution, but in your remarks, it sounded like you thought we might have to hack the atmosphere. And I wonder if you had a line on geoengineering in general or any particular technology.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one of the issues with dealing with climate solutions is all of us have a different spectrum of what we think is good and acceptable. And I tell students, you have to support some things that you don't like, or we'll never get anything done. And I personally don't like the idea of stratospheric dust seeding. And it isn't the technology that disturbs me the most. There are some things that could go wrong. I don't see a governance and social consensus behind doing that in a way that the world wants. I see one country being able to do it, for $10 or $100 billion a year. The United States could do it. Honestly, Elon Musk could do that personally. And so it's more the social aspects of stratospheric dust seeding and climate control that give me pause than the technologies. I think we could do it, but the best example is when Pinatubo erupted in the 90s, the Earth cooled about 1 degree Fahrenheit because of the particles blasted into the stratosphere. We know that it works. Pinatubo also delayed the recovery of the ozone hole, caused global drought, and did lots of other things. So we start reducing sunlight. We don't have to do a lot, but we start tinkering at that scale, and we should be cautious about it. But it's social that I think is the hard part. Just imagine in the U.S. telling Congress we're going to put climate control in the hands of the United Nations.
I wanted to ask, continuing on the point that you've been talking about so far, in terms of private sector intervention on this problem, what quantity of removal to profit, like if atmospheric gas capture had a definitive rate per billion tons, et cetera, what number would you believe to be a good benchmark that would incentivize the private sector to believe that there is a stable return on investment? Thank you.
All right, thanks. I didn't mean to bypass you. I didn't see the hand up over there. I'm not sure. The higher the price is, clearly the more action and activity there would be to remove it or keep it from going to the air. The chapter in my book on cleaning up the steel industry, the company making the first green steel in the world, it's called Stop the Steal. That is made possible because of a $65 price on carbon dioxide emissions. It takes 2 tons of CO2 to make 1 ton of steel. So the company saves about 125 euros for every ton of steel by using hydrogen in place of coal. So as I mentioned before, when carbon pricing is present, all kinds of things happen. Exactly what that leverage point is depends on what the market and people and governments are willing to bear. I should ask Larry here in the second row. He's a climate economist, so I pass the baton to you, Larry. What's the answer?
What's the question again?
The question is what should the price on carbon be? $100 a ton is the aspirational price for CO2 removal, and we're not there yet. And right now there are companies like Microsoft and Stripe willing to pay a lot more than that to get the industry off the ground. But there are only so many Microsofts and Stripes, and at some point the government has to step in.
Rob, how do you think about the intersection between the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, especially when thinking through, for me, there's a lot of anxiety that I have around the biodiversity crisis, seeing like how we've lost, 2/3 of species, in the last 50 years and so on and so forth. And how do you think about solutions that help address both, as opposed to some solutions around the climate crisis I don't really see helping the biodiversity crisis?
Yeah, great question. We'll be brief, Jen, I promise. I guess for me, I have, for the whole family of sort of natural climate solutions, I have concerns about what I call carbon blinders, which is we start viewing the world almost like a spreadsheet where, where can we stuff extra carbon in instead of looking for ways to enhance, old growth. We study old growth forests, biodiversity, water purity, and, water exchange and things like that. So I think we can't just focus on carbon. We have to take into account a broader suite of things. I'm going to stop because you've had enough of me. And let me, we have one more guest, so let me tell a quick story. Dina Montague's over here. I was in Dina's class teaching a month or two ago. And at the end of class, it was time for me to leave. I got up to go, and Dina looked at me and said, "Rob, you can't leave." I was like, I can, but I won't. So now I'm telling you, you can't leave because you're going to have the same benefit that I had in that class. So it's my pleasure to introduce Vivian, Leilani, Shay. Vivian's a co-term in our systems. She applies GIS to terrestrial hydrology. She worked at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab for a couple of summers. On top of all of her science, as an Earth Systems co-term, she's an artist, a dancer. She had a capstone project, Questions for a Tree, that was performed over at the Stanford farm. So she's an amazing artist and scientist, and it's my pleasure to introduce Vivian, and that's all for me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Rob, for that introduction. Again, my name is Vivian, and yeah, we read Into the Clear Blue Sky for the Master Seminar led by Dina Montague, and I was sitting on the train reading the book and just felt really inspired. So this song goes out to the optimism I feel with my Earth Systems community. Riding the train, I looked out the window to my left and saw a glimmering lake. There were birds taking off, their feet splashing like skipping rocks on the sparkling mirror of the deep blue sky. Riding the train, I looked out the window to my right and saw a parking lot. There were cars and a fence, oh, it was quite the difference, just on the other side of the tracks. I thought of what was here before we went and changed it. Do you think the birds remember how it looked before we rearranged it? Well, Amazon needed a new warehouse. The land it's on didn't matter much to them. So I'll sit on the train and wonder why we turned the Amazon to lumber. And I'm tired of incentives trying to keep the world's attention. 'Cause when you watch the change around you, it's not easy to ignore. But the dozers and the drillers will deny and delay. They'll hesitate till it's too late, then say, you'll know the way. And I know it isn't fair, we inherited their dirty air, but we've got no choice. We've got to use our voices into the clear blue sky. I want to go into the clear blue sky, into the clear blue sky. I want to go into the clear blue sky. 'Cause I want to make a difference, clean up the world's emissions. And I have faith that others want that too. So take my hand, even if you're fearful. Let's heal our land and our atmosphere full. Into the clear blue sky, I want to go into the clear blue sky, into the clear blue sky. We're gonna go into the clear blue sky. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you, Vivian. I think all lectures should start and end with music. This was a fantastic set of discussions, as well as just the lyrics, the poetry out here. I was just struck by so many things that were discussed. You know, what Rob was appealing to was a moral compass. And what we owe to the next generations And one of the quotes that I have really liked, enjoyed, is an indigenous saying that we do not inherit this earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And I say it so many times that my staff decided to paint it on my office walls. So you ever come to my office, it's there. And that's what Rob was appealing to, that we are throwing out this garbage out there in the atmosphere, and we're just dumping it. And we owe it to our next generations to be able to clean it so that they can live the life that we and our ancestors did. So this is a debt that we owe them. I think that's, if I look at the underlying theme, that's what it is. And there are many kinds of garbage, the CO2, nitrous oxide, N2O, methane, and you're making a strategic choice that let's look at methane carefully because the other ones are also there, but they're harder and they're longer lived, and methane is short. And the short-term effects of methane are really bad, and that's the heating that you talked about. I just also want to note that Alfred Sportman is here, and he led a whole effort on CO2 Research Center, and this is on the atmospheric CO2 removal. You're exactly right. If you look at CO2 and do it the way that people are now thinking of direct air capture, it's not just 1,500 kilowatt hours per ton, but it's like 1,800 kilowatt hours per ton. Regardless, the laws of physics say that there's a minimum to that. And the minimum is about 150 kilowatt hours per ton. That's really bad. You can't beat the laws of physics on that. And that's bad. On the other hand, just to put some hope in this potentially difficult situation, let's put it this way, is the fact that we all need to eat. There's agriculture. And yes, there are challenges with agriculture. But if you look at the waste of the crops, the crop waste of corn stover and others, that's about 9 to 10 gigatons of CO2 that are crops that we don't even use. We don't eat them. They're the waste. And many parts of the world, we burn them to clear up the field. So if you could connect the dots between agriculture and restoring the atmosphere, or doing other ways, natural ways, but maybe engineering them a little bit, maybe there's some hope out there. And this is a challenge to our people, our folks, students and professors out here and other places to really address this in a way that is holistic, but at scale. So with this, I don't want to delay the reception outside. Let's give Rob and Leif and Vivian a big round of applause. Thank you for joining.